much for that very kind introduction, Pauline. It is lovely, lovely to be here with you guys today. Before I get going, I just want to thank everybody involved with organizing and putting this together because it's a lot of work. So Fabrice and Hugo and Gregoire and Pauline and everybody backstage, thank you for making me feel so welcome and supported. So as Pauline mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about how everything is invented. The name of my talk is It's All Invented. I'm going to talk to you about how our personal narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves, impact not just what we do every day, but how our teams operate, how our organization functions, and at the end of the day, the future of our products. So as you can probably tell just from that 10-second introduction to my title slide, this talk is not about the nuts and bolts of product management. This talk is about the interpersonal skills that we all need to be great product managers and great product leaders. So seeing that we're going to talk more about the personal side of things today, more about the human side, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me personally to go beyond what Pauline has just shared in my intro. So, I believe she did just give away a little bit of the spoiler, but I do live in France. I'm from America and spent many years in the UK and moved here a few years ago. And I'm always asked, why did you do it? Especially because I don't speak French very well, but I'm working on it. And I just say, it's a beautiful area. This is a picture of where I live. This is the view outside my house. I mean, how could you not want to be here and be part of that community? That also means that I think this is my new local product meetup, which is super cool. So I'm very excited to get to know a lot of you after the conference today at the after party. And I promise I am working on the French. The other thing I'll share with you is when we moved here, my partner and I, we adopted this lovely beagle named Max. Max is a bit of a grand beagle, and I'm pretty sure he's more fluent in French than either my partner and I are. On this day, he thought he was going out to join us on an excursion to go to the Tour de France and see the local stage, but we quickly tricked him out with a sausage because Max likes bicycle tires, so that could have been mayhem. Anyway, so that's just a bit about me. I live kind of locally in the southwest of France. I'm really working on learning French, and I have a beagle that I bribe regularly with sausages. So back to the talk at hand. I'm here to talk to you about, as I mentioned, It's All Invented, and the stories and our personal narratives. And as Pauline mentioned, I'm an executive coach, and I work with product leaders and leadership teams at organizations of all shapes and sizes all over the world. And I'm not going to get too much in depth into what it is I do in that role, but I am going to tell you a little bit more about what I did before, which is product coaching. I call myself a recovering product coach. So in doing that work, of course, I worked on different areas and variations of product operating models, discovery, delivery, strategy, frameworks, all of that fun stuff. And I noticed probably about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, that my clients, in the conversations we were having, a new pattern was showing up. Well, we might focus and start out with something that's very operational, about strategy or about OKRs. Very quickly, it would turn to a personal statement or a question. Something like, Kate, we can't move ahead in that area because I'd have to work with the CTO, and I really think the CTO doesn't like me. I think he's kind of a jerk. So unless you have some way for us to solve that quandary, I think we're going to have to put that to the side. Or I don't think we can actually get my team involved in this work because they're really demotivated right now. They're not ready to take on anything more. So unless you can help us figure out how to get my team back in action, I think we need to put that aside. Or there's always I don't think I'm really any good at my job anyway, so Kate, what do you do? Maybe I should just do that. So I kind of realized after hearing comments like this again and again and again that I didn't have the skills that I really wanted and needed to help my clients figure out those types of problems, the more interpersonal problems. And that's when I started training as an executive coach and learning more about how to bring these different kinds of challenges to the surface. So in the work that I do now, I know when I hear something like that, hear a comment like that from my clients, my spidey senses kind of go off. And I realize what I'm hearing is just the tip of the iceberg. They're telling me, they're giving me a glimpse into a story that is definitely spinning around in their minds that's that's really influencing how they're going to work, who they're going to work with, and where they're going to feel safe. I also know that any kind of mind chatter that might be going on in their minds about that story is going to come out at some point. It's going to surface in their actions, their behaviors, and the decisions they make. And that's going to shape what's possible for their organizations. So, luckily, I'm in a very privileged position that I now get to work with clients to help them identify some of these stories and try to catch them in the act. Try to understand what's the purpose behind them, where they're coming from, and how they can rewrite them if they choose to. And that's the information that I want to share with you today. We're going to go through, I'm going to use a specific framework. There's a lot of different ways we can do that work and unpack them, and looking at things like limiting beliefs and looking at things like systemic factors that may be impacting them. But there's one framework that I constantly go to, and I'm going to dig into that today to share with you how you can identify patterns as well of these stories that are going on, understand the purpose behind them, at least at a foundational level, and invent some new possibilities to rewrite those stories. So let's start with the patterns that our stories have. So just like anything else in life, our stories have patterns, and they're going to show up at work, and they're going to show up at home, and everywhere in between. So for those of you who have not worked with a coach before, I can tell you the very first question I'm going to ask you in a coaching session or a coaching meeting is, what do you want to talk about today? Because you're not coming into it with an agenda. I'm not coming into that kind of conversation to train you. We're just there to focus on what's going on with you. And I would say 9 times out of 10, the response that I get to that question is a story. And in that story, my client is usually owning one of these storylines or playing the lead role as one of these different characters. So the hero, the victim, or the villain. This is something called the Cartman trauma triangle. Cartman drama triangle. Did I say that correctly? Anyway, the Cartman drama triangle that was developed by Stephen Cartman back in the 1960s. He was a psychologist who worked with dozens and dozens of clients and realized that they were telling him similar types of stories again and again. So he developed this tool to help them easily be able to identify what story they were telling and what the impact was on those around them. And that's exactly how I use it with my clients. So I'm going to walk you through these different storylines in more detail because I'm going to be referring to this triangle quite a bit in the rest of my talk today. So let's start with the hero. The hero is, of course, the person who saves the day. Is going to rescue everybody from any challenge, any problem, any kind of possibility of failure. The hero storyline very well aligns with the myth that we all hold of what a leader should be, right? That leader should be somebody that can handle anything without even breaking out a sweat. So my clients, the vast majority of them like to hold this leader role. That's just where they feel they should be. So the leader is going to make sure everybody feels safe, everybody is taken care of. There's no fire. They're going to put out any fire that's kind of lingering in the background. And by doing that, though, there's some negative connotations that come from being the hero. Because by putting out everybody else's fires, that means that they don't really have time to do their own work, right? So things are going to fall through the cracks. Or if they try to do it all, everybody else's work and their own, they're most likely going to be headed towards burnout, because you can't keep working at that pace. They also, most likely, are going to be building up an organization of team members and teams that don't know how to solve their own challenges. They've enabled different behaviors that don't align with growth and learning in an organization. And they enable the next 2 storylines we're going to talk about, which is the victim and the villain. Let's focus on the victim because there is a direct correlation there, as you can imagine. So the victim is the person who says, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, poor me. So in the example I gave just a minute ago of one of the things my clients used to tell me of, the CTO and I don't get along. We just have too many problems. I think she's kind of a jerk. I don't know how to work with her. That's a victim statement, actually. Not saying that it may not be true, but it's just you're coming from a place of having a victim storyline. People maybe you've even said this actually, I know I did in the past, that I can't get the work done because I can't get the data from engineering. That's a victim storyline. I'm not allowed to go talk to customers. That's a victim storyline. Again, not necessarily that it's not true, but it's coming from a place where you're being helpless and hopeless and feeling like you have no power. So as you can imagine, victim and hero feed each other. Victim loves the hero's storyline when the hero is going to come in and save the day. On the other side of the triangle is the villain. The villain blames everybody else for whatever has gone wrong, right? The villain says, if you would have done it the way I told you to, everything would be fine. So the stakeholders that you probably all have heard at some point say, the teams don't need to go to talk to customers. I know what the product should be. Just get people to build it the way I see it. That is very much a villain statement, because that next line is going to be, and if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. You should just listen to what I'm saying. So the villain is very happy pointing fingers. The villain is very happy throwing other people under the bus, and the villain is always right. So imagine, just think for a moment, a situation that you have going on at work, or maybe at home, and where your tendency kind of lies. Can you see yourself as a victim or a villain or a hero? Or can you maybe see yourself, like a lot of my clients do, shifting and changing roles? So I explained this tool to a client a few weeks ago, and every time I do, I'm usually on a Zoom call. So I'm sitting here like this and walking him through the drama triangle. And at the end of it, I remember he started to chuckle a little bit. And it was a mischievous kind of laugh, and I asked where that was coming from. And he said, well, I like to be the leader. That's where I feel most comfortable. But he's like, sometimes I like to be the villain. I like to just kind of cause some trouble and mix things up. And what he's talking about is something that we all do, and that the drama triangle allows for. It allows for us to move and shift and change our storylines in a very brief amount of time. So you could go into a meeting being the hero, being the one that's going to lead the meeting and get the best out of everyone and make it a great use of time. Halfway through, things aren't going the way you want them to, and you're feeling more like the villain, more like the victim, and then you leave feeling like the villain because nobody did what you said, you didn't get the work done that was expected to, and it's everybody else's fault. And Cartman theorizes the reason we do this, the reason we change our narrative so quickly is a means of survival. So he says that we create the drama and the triangle actually by shifting and moving around and changing our storylines quickly because that helps us to defend, deny, and protect ourselves. So in many ways, the stories that we are telling ourselves are a natural occurrence. This is what the brain was designed to do, to protect ourselves from times that we feel at risk and in trouble. As we all have heard at various points, our brains are there to keep us alive, to help us survive. And in the days of the cave women and cavemen, that might have been surfacing in fight or flight when we see like the snaggletooth tiger coming at us, letting us know that we better get running if we want to make it back to the cave. Today, our brain has evolved a little bit, but enough to know that it doesn't mean we automatically have to run away, but we do have the power to create a story and change that story to continue to keep us safe. So in essence, our stories do have purpose. They are there to help us survive, to help us keep in a place of safety. And those stories are features. They're not bugs, but they are very buggy. So our stories are developed and created by millions of pieces of information coming at us every single day. I mean, as you guys know, we're all bombarded by noises and sounds and conversations and random interactions and not so random interactions, and noticing and picking up on body language and certain meetings. And all of that gets layered on top of with biases and experiences that we have. And our brain does its very best to organize that information. But our brain wasn't built for accuracy. Right? Our brain was built to keep us alive. So the brain is not equipped like our friendly PC or Macintosh computer. It doesn't have the ability to just go back and pull out that saved conversation that perfectly describes what happened with you and your manager a couple weeks ago, much less this morning. Instead, with all this information coming at us, it goes into our memory banks and gets meshed and merged together, and what is pulled out is an imperfect memory. Some neuroscientists have even gone on to say that that memory is invented, it's imagined. Gregory Burns, who's a psychiatrist, a professor at Emory University in the States, and an author of a book called Self-Delusion, goes so far as to say, who you think you are, your notion of self, is a mere cartoon, just as your notions of others are cartoon versions of them. So, when I say it's all invented, when I named my talk, it's all invented, it was very purposeful. It's because we're constantly creating narratives to define our world. So if our brain has the ability to do that, though, to create narratives to keep us feeling safe and protected, it also has the ability to create narratives and stories to take us into a new direction. And of course, there's a coaching tool that I use that you could try out to help you figure out where you are now, where those stories are sitting for you, and what that new direction might look like. So this is a coaching tool that is simply called The Line. I really tried to find a more kind of formal name for it, and I looked and couldn't find it. Within the coaching communities that I work in, it's just The Line. So The Line says, very simply, that our stories and narratives can live above the line, where they're based on being very curious and open and wanting to learn, or below the line, when they're based on being defensive and protective and committed to being right. So as you can imagine, the majority of the Cartman drama triangle stories are below the line, right? And that's it's not surprising. 80% of our stories are negative. 80% of our self-stories are negative. And about 95% of them are repetitive. So we're constantly telling ourselves some pretty negative storylines about how to stay safe, we have to be right and protect ourselves, and shift our stories to ensure we're doing that. But that does mean that about 20% of those stories are above the line. And there's an alternative to the Cartman triangle that's called the empowerment triangle, or the empowerment dynamic sometimes, that can help us create a vision for what that might look like, what a different kind of story that's not based on survival and protection might look like. So the empowerment triangle introduces us to new storylines, that instead of being the victim, we'll be the creator. Instead of being the villain, we'll be the challenger. And instead of being the hero, we'll be the coach. Let me explain those a little bit more. So this is all directly from below the line to above the line. Below the line hero to the rescue. I'm going to save the day, and I'm going to probably burn out as I do it, but I'm going to put all my time and energy into being that hero leader, is moved from below the line, form of defensiveness and protection, into a coach mode, above the line, where instead of that type of investment, you're going to be asking people questions to help them develop themselves. So you're going to be approaching it in an above-the-line kind of story based on curiosity, based on being open, and based on wanting to learn. Also, the victim, as I've talked about, I'm stuck, I can't make any decisions, I can't move, is shifted to being a creator, somebody that knows they have a lot of options, and that's what their story is telling them. That, let's say, the victim is saying, I can't work with the CTO and I can't work together. Instead of just holding on to that storyline, the creator is going to come up with some options that you can do to really see if that's true or not. Maybe you could have a conversation with the CTO. Maybe you could actually talk to some of your mentors or your friends or your peers within the organization to try to get their read on the situation. There are options, and the creator is above the line, considering that storyline based on curiosity and wanting to try new things. And then lastly, the villain below the line becomes the challenger above the line. The challenger is still going to call things out like the villain does, but they're going to do it in a different way. They're going to be constructive. They're going to make sure that everyone knows that whatever they're saying is not meant to blame them or throw them under the bus. It's just meant to help point out some things that the organization needs to work on, but you're all on the same side. So again, below the line, protecting yourself and creating survival skills for yourself through your stories, to above the line, being curious and wanting to be open to how things could be in the story. So that's just a quick look at how we could move from storylines of being below the line to storylines being above the line. Now I want to talk about that third element of the work that I'm doing with clients these days to help them unpack and think about their stories. And that's, if we know that we have these patterns, if we know that there's a purpose behind them, how can we start to rewrite them? What does that look like? So I'm going to share with you just a few, actually, of the tools that I use with clients to help them invent new possibilities for their stories. And you're going to be surprised to see that your product skills are going to come in handy here. There is an alignment to the work. So the first thing that I focus on with clients when we're trying to understand the stories is, let's take a look at what's the story now. And let's get a good understanding of where, even by collecting some data, where you're sitting most often. So this is kind of like self-discovery, right? This is actually similar to when we're doing work, we're thinking of a new initiative. Before we just jump in, we do some work to get some understanding of where are we now. So I encourage my clients to try this practice, and it's called Build a Baseline. And that it advocates for you to take a few minutes out between meetings, which I know is a tough thing to do because we like to run from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting and conference room to conference room, but to take a few minutes out and to stop, grab a piece of paper from your journal or a Post-it and a pen and write down in that meeting, do a quick self-reflection. Were you above the line or below the line? You get extra bonus points if you can actually name the story you were telling during the session. Were you a hero? Did you move to a villain? And then what triggered that movement? What brought it on? And I'm asking you, as I ask my clients, to write down these reflections for two reasons. One, simply stopping and writing things down changes the way we think. It's a different kind of capacity of thinking and reflecting on things that happens when we pass from our brains to our hands to pen and paper. So stop and write it down, even if it's just for a few minutes. Plus, by writing it down, you can start to create kind of a track record of where you've been. And if you can't do it between every meeting, try to at least do it once a day. See where you are. So that's something that you can work on and use as a tool to help get a baseline of where are you now with your stories. Then we want to focus on where do you want to go. So this is similar to the work that we do when we're creating a vision for our products. So in using that kind of thinking, I use a different tool though. I don't use a product vision framework. I use something called Give Yourself an A. And I use it with clients who want to make any kind of change. So it could be related to a story, it could be related to something else going on in their lives. This practice comes from a book called The Art of Possibility, which is an amazing book by Rosamund and Benjamin Zander, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in anything I'm talking about today, to go pick it up, because it's what's inspired this talk. And it gives you kind of a guideline and a framework for thinking about what is the future story I want to be? Where do I want to get to? In American schools, an A is the perfect score. So this tool allows you to think of that, achieving that future vision, and doing so perfectly. All you have to do is, again, take pen and paper and write a letter to future you. Future you in 6 months, 9 months, maybe 12 months. And write down in as much detail as you can, what's the change that you've made, what story were you going from and to, and how did you get there? So for example, if I were to write a story about wanting to move from hero to coach, it would start something like, Dear Future Kate, and it would be dated December 31st, 2024. Dear Future Kate, congratulations, you've succeeded. You're no longer holding the hero story so close to your heart. You're now fully embodied in the coaching spirit and storyline. And then I would detail how I got there. And again, the more detail you can bring, the better, because that gives you more chance and more opportunity to actually make it real. So how are you going to get there? If we've got a baseline through our self-reflections and building up our self-awareness, if we've got a vision for where we want to go, how do we really get there? So this is doing what you guys all do very well, I'm sure, and that's building an experiment. So it's taking those items that you listed out and give yourself an A letter for how you're going to make this change, and you're going to break them down into smaller experiments. So this 15% rule comes from a book called Connected. It's written by Carol Robin, and I think it's and David Burton, who's her colleague. And they were professors at Stanford University Business School. You might have heard Carol on Lenny's podcast a couple weeks ago, if you happen to listen to that. She was talking about the course in interpersonal skills that she taught at the business school, and how in working with executives and business folks, one of the biggest challenges she had with them was to realize that they can make changes and become more open and more vulnerable with those that they're working with, and that how powerful that can be. So she advocates starting with your zone of comfort, knowing where you are, what's your baseline, and you'll know that because, hey, you've been building up your baseline through an exercise and self-reflection. And knowing where you want to get to, which is part of your zone of learning, and you've got that because you've been doing some vision work and writing yourself, giving yourself an A. And then simply creating a 15% experiment. So just something small that's going to give you enough evidence to know if you want to keep going or if you need to iterate. It's not a big leap that's going to go from zone of comfort into a danger zone, because we all know what happens there. Then we start creating stories that keep us below the line. So it's just a small experiment. This is the work that we do every day in our continuous discovery. So that is such a big overall quick look at how our stories impact us and those around us, and how we can start to create some change, and the fact that we can invent new possibilities. And the tools that I just mentioned to you are just 3 that I use with my clients. If you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to do some more research, because there's tons of information out there on how you can start to create this change yourself. Before you do it, though, there's a few gotchas that I want to share before I send you out into the world to start analyzing your stories and everyone else's. The first key is that you can't change anyone else's story. So please keep focused on your own. That's going to take enough time and energy and effort, believe me. So just because now you're aware perhaps of what the hero role might be, and you think you see it in your manager, doesn't mean you can go work with your manager on that right away and point that out. That's not going to work. The change has to come from you, and you've got to put in the time. It's not going to happen overnight. And to get the best success, to get the best opportunity for success, I really encourage you to build a team of people around you to support you. So if you've experienced trauma in your past, or even at a past job, that might be working with a therapist. It might be working with your partner and letting them know what's the story you're living and what would you like to change to. Some of my clients work with, have colleagues at work that they share this information with, so their colleagues can help them stay accountable in the meetings that they're in, to make sure they're not always acting like the hero, that they're at times trying and experimenting what it might be like to be the coach. So build a team. And of course, there's other coaches. There's myself and others out there to help you along the way too. But what's most important is that you do remember that all of this is invented. It's invented by you. And you have the possibility to move from below the line to above the line by taking a look at the patterns that you might be living now, where that's coming from. If it's survival, if it's because of fear or fear and danger that you feel might be lurking around you. And invest in inventing new opportunities and new possibilities for yourself. And of course, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Thank you.